Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me again. I'm sorry I'm a little late. Second time I'm trying to figure out the way to log in, and I wrote notes now this time. Now I know exactly how to get in and be here on time um, before you all are here. But I appreciate you being here on time. Hello, Rhonda, if you're here. Um, I hope you can see the notes in the live chat. Feel free to say hello. But basically, welcome to my podcast, Dragonfly Discussions. You're welcome to enter your name and location you are from. I am thrilled you are listening, and I hope you enjoyed this session together. Then a safe space reminder, please use your own safe space parameters amongst the chapters I read, which may arouse emotions or memories of your own. You are welcome to excuse yourself or stay. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows um, those things. So today we're going to be exploring chapter 2, which is subchapter, well, not subchapter, but a chapter titled Normal versus Chaos. And you're going to kind of see why. We just finished chapter 1, where I kind of went through my birth and how my parents met. And then when I say parents, I mean my dad and stepmom, how they met. And then my dad divorcing my birth mom, and then all of the good times developing with me and my new step family. We were a blended family. So it was Linda, who is my stepmom, and she had two children from a previous marriage, and then it was me and my dad from his previous marriage, so the five of us. So we're going to get started here. Again, this is chapter 2, Normal versus Chaos. It's not the longest of chapters, so we may get through the whole thing all together today. I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. Um, so I will start. This is subchapter Birth Mom Horrors. So when I say birth mom, that is Debbie. That is my birth mom, Debbie. I call her Debbie. It must have been when I was about 5 or 6 years old, perhaps when I started learning about drugs and alcohol more. I began to see more of it through the lives of Debbie, my grandfather Leroy, and my Aunt Bee, Debbie's sister. I came across many people throughout my childhood, but these three people stood out as prime examples of drug addicts and alcoholics. My chaotic world had started to take shape. Was it when the suitcase was flown out the window? Or was it when Debbie taught me how to steal clothes, booze, and license plate stickers off of cars? So I'll pause there. So the suitcase flying out the window. What that was um, my grandmother lived in Exeter, which is near Lindsay, and my mom would birth mom, well, Debbie, birth mom would stay in like random places, and so my grandmother let me see her when I would visit my grandma, not letting my dad know. Really, I didn't really let him know. She wasn't supposed to see me, but my grandma let me see her. So there was a lot of times when sometimes my dad knew, but it wasn't kosher. But there was a time when I was staying with her, supposedly to stay with my grandma, but I was with Debbie, and I remember there was men, violent men, always around, and I was just young, and I remember they were so mad at me being around that one guy chucked my suitcase, literally chucked my suitcase off the balcony out the window, like just, and I watched it just fall and smash, and all my clothes and stuffed animals was just like, wow, okay. And then the license plate stickers, you'll hear, but and the clothes, stealing clothes, she would take me into stores like Kmart. Um, Kmart was around back then, just random stores, and just steal clothes. She would put them on underneath her clothes. She would steal underwear. She would steal socks. She would steal anything she could get her hands on. Booze. She would steal booze. But the license plates were interesting because the stickers, they were easier to peel off. So I'll explain. Back then, and I mean back in the early 80s, it was an easy task and they would peel right off, meaning the registration stickers. Perhaps it was having to drive my drunken mother back home from the zoo at age 13. Could I have spoken up about any of that? Who would have believed me? And if so, then I would have been taken away from my mother. She became Debbie to me later on. So that zoo moment, so that was a crazy, crazy, crazy moment. That was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back in my life with her. I was pretty much done being afflicted by her and put through all of these crazy things. And so I was thinking she might pull off a zoo trip with us together. And she had a little shack house just off of Belmont, just east of the zoo, and in this neighborhood over there. And it wasn't much of a house. She didn't really have much in it. Um, and the whole entire time she was intoxicated. So by the end of the visit, I had to, at 13 years old, jump in the driver's seat and drive us home. And so I'll talk about that as well. Uh, so children want to see the good in everyone, especially their parents. So when the harsh truth was staring me right in the face as a child, I turned away from it and pretended that it wasn't happening. Oddly enough, I had loved my mother, quote, mother then. I really did. I saw blindly the best in her when I was young. I wanted to be with her, and I missed her. I had longed for her, wondering why she never wanted to see me or why she never called, why she never remembered my birthday. Oh, wow. Birthday's coming up next Tuesday. Or when she did remember, it was usually after the date. I often wondered what it was that was so wrong with me. So many whys already at such a young age. So yeah, it was really hard growing up. My first few years, she was in and out of my life. She was a drug addict. Um, she was in and out of jail a lot. She was just absent. She was not trustworthy. Who knew what she was into, what drugs she was into, what crowd she was hanging around with. Um, she was starting to lose her mind. It just was not very pleasant with her. I wished that, you know, she was a different person. And I think that's why I put up with it for so long. But this was a pivotal moment where I finally stood up for myself. But I often wondered, did she really care about me? But learning after my own drug addiction, I have some compassion in a way. Um, Still would think that if I had a child, I would try to change much better than she tried. She didn't really try that hard. Don't think I would have put my child through such things that I was put through. Um, but I did. I missed her. I had these questions as to, she never could remember my birthday. And then if she did, it was always late. And then she always gave me these dirty toys that were like smelled like smoke and they were dirty. And I was just like, this is all I'm worth to you. It was very interesting growing up with opposites. And that's why the normal versus chaos, because my birthdays with my dad and step family were lovely. We had cake, we had parties, we had friends over from school. We had, it was just normal, like a kid should get. Not anything elaborate or fancy, but just simple. But yeah, it was so opposite with her. And I definitely was never remembered um, around my birthday, the birth of her child. I don't think I could remember the birth of my child. I didn't have a child. But anyways, all throughout my childhood and adolescent years from first grade till my sophomore year. So this is a long time that, I've gone through this sophomore year. That's a long time to have gone through all this trauma with my grandfather, my birth mom, um, and then having this normal life with my dad, step family. So Debbie was allowed to have visitation rights with me. My father abided and allowed Debbie to have supervised visits at first, albeit reluctantly. So he didn't really want her to have anything. Excuse me, hold on. My dad didn't really want anything to do with her. And he didn't really want me to have much to do with her because she was bad. She was not a good person or a safe mom. So there were many visits to the parks throughout Fresno. So there's all kinds of parks downtown that are like open soccer fields and fields. So we would visit at public places like that. Debbie would call my father, and that's my birth mom, Debbie, would call my father and ask to see me at a park, but it was never in the same park because Debbie moved a lot. She did. She was never in the same spot. I was always unsure whether she was going to be sober or not, clean or dirty, with a guy or alone, because she was most of the time homeless or just, I don't know, just shacking up with wherever she could be. My father and mother, which is my stepmom, Linda, would drive me to the park on some weekends after Debbie would call and ask me to see me. I was, of course, always excited and eager to see her. Ugh, my throat, sorry. I would peek out the windows to see if she was really waiting outside for me. So I didn't even know if she would really show up most of the time. Some of the times she didn't show up. Most of the time she didn't show up. Yeah, most of the time she didn't show up. But anyways, oftentimes she wouldn't show up at all, and that would leave me heartbroken. Sad. But when she did show up, I would recognize her from a mile away. My parents would let me out and allow her to approach us slowly. Yeah, because we didn't know what kind of state of mind she would be in. We didn't know if there was other people around. We just didn't know. So I then was able to go to her and hug her and began our visit when it was deemed safe. My parents would often sit in the car watching us like a hawk out of fear they would kidnap me, only allowing me to have little time with her. So yeah, there could have been some bad people because back then in the 80s they were actually stealing kids and they were kidnapping them and selling them, just like you see um, with women, and what's happening with sex trades. It was the same thing. It's probably still happening now, but they were actually more graphic back then. They were hollowing out babies and they were stuffing the babies with drugs. And then they were like sewing them back up, wrapping them in a towel, and then shipping them with people trying to get across the border. So it was pretty disgusting back in the 80s because there was that big, huge war on drugs and there was a whole lot of things going on back then. Cartels, drug cartels, I remember. It was pretty gnarly. Uh, so Debbie would often bring a toy or stuffed animal for me during these visits. It would usually be dirty and smelled like cigarette smoke, like I said. She would usually be smoking cigarettes and had a drink of some sort of all times with her. I was a child that always knew what was going on around me beyond my level of actual age, especially with the people I was around. So I always kind of know that she was drunk. I would be able to tell when Debbie was high or drunk. The tension surrounding my parents was always thick when Debbie called or visited me. I could see how stressed my father would be. He didn't like the fact that Debbie was visiting me, but I had wanted to see my quote mother. I would often leave these visits, quote, affected in some fashion. Either emotionally or psychologically, the visits hurt me every single time. I just never admitted to that. And that's a huge, huge, huge statement right there. Had I spoke up, I can't guarantee I wouldn't have gone down the path that I went down, but I think it would have helped me process it and maybe be supported and maybe felt that I wasn't so alone and unable to know how to deal with it, because it was pretty traumatic, when you look at it all, because none of the other kids had anything like this going on in their weekends. They didn't have a parent like that. Um, they didn't see some of the chaos or abuse or violence or drug abuse or alcohol abuse or neglect. They didn't have any of that. So I had to process all of that at a very, very, very young age. And at an age where I knew that if I told my dad, he would take me away from her. And at the time, you know, I'm not seeing all the bad in my birth mom, Debbie, because I'm just a child in a way, like, but I'm seeing it and I don't want to admit it. And, but at the same time, I have to because this isn't normal and I don't deserve to be affected by this. So it was really a nuts. That's why normal versus chaos, because it was such chaos with Debbie. And it still is. I haven't had communication with her in a long, long time now, but I can't. She's on my well being. All right. So let's see here. Where was I? So I just never admitted to that. So during the times when her phone calls and visits were absent from my life, she would usually be in jail. So oftentimes when I didn't hear from her, she was in and out of jail. Debbie was in and out of prison or jail constantly during those years of my life. She was constantly moving, living on the streets, or with some bad guy. So yeah, there was just never, I didn't never know when I was going to hear from her, where she was, if she was free or locked up or dead. Um, didn't know. So this is subchapter Weekends in Exeter, page 38. During those years, so this is during those years as I was a child growing up, I was also allowed to visit my grandmother, Debbie's mother, Grandma in Exeter, is what I nicknamed her while growing up. She and my grandfather Leroy lived in Exeter, California for many years. So I called her my grandma in Exeter. So that was like because I had so many grandmas. So I had my San Jose grandma, I had my grandma Lemley, I had my grandma in Exeter. So my grandma in Exeter is my birth mom, Debbie's mom. And this is where more chaos happens. Sorry if you see any kind of message popping up, but my computer is very old. Um, okay. So the drive is what I called it. It was when my parents would drive me from Fresno to meet my grandparents halfway to a rest stop. My sister would often come with my dad, and we would sit in the back making faces at the cars that passed by. She made the drive just a little easier. There I would be exchanged from one car to the other to face a weekend of unknown terror. I would often panic and wanted to ask for the car to be turned around, but I didn't ever want to make a scene or say anything upsetting, so I kept quiet and off to Exeter I would go for the weekend. So what that's all about, that's a whole lot right there. Um so what I did throughout my childhood from maybe 6, well, yeah, young, all the way up until like probably 12, 11, 12, 13, maybe. I would go from Fresno to Exeter, and it was like every other weekend I would see my grandmother. And my grandmother and I were really, really, really close. She was a really spunky lady, um, but it was a very chaotic scene in Exeter. So they lived in Exeter first in this really shack of a house, and then they carried over into a better house into Visalia. But All my childhood, all of my upbringing, I spent every other weekend almost in Exeter with my grandma. So we would take this drive from Fresno, and then it's a pit stop on your way to Visalia. I can't remember the exact exit, but there's where you can get gas, and there's like a turnout where you can park your car. There's a restaurant or restroom, and then you go back out and down to Fresno, and then my grandparents would take me to Exeter. So I called it the drive because it was just this drive. And I remember the oleanders, and I remember once the oleanders got close, or once we got to the oleanders, that meant, we were getting close to being there, which there wasn't always a good place to be with my grandparents, but you're going to see. So that's what all of that is about. I always had anxiety doing it, but I was excited to see my grandma. I pretended. I pretended a lot that nothing was going on because I loved my grandma. She was a lot of fun. So off to Exeter I would go for the weekend. Debbie often caught wind of the news when I would visit my grandparents in Exeter and sometimes snuck visits to see me. Yeah. My grandma was an angel with damaged wings that could not fly. She always stuck by her husband and family no matter what. Therefore, Debbie would take advantage of that and use that opportunity to see me, which to a kid like I was nothing short of a dream come true. So, Debbie would violate, any of the court orders that she could not visit me, but she manipulated my grandmother, who was weak. And my grandmother didn't want to stir the pot, so she agreed to whatever. And that allowed Debbie to see me, take me to places that I shouldn't have been, learning things I shouldn't have learned, like stealing uh, out, and then all the alcohol, all the partying, like all of that came through these visits to Visalia or Exeter initially to see my grandma, but then my birth mom would take me elsewhere. My grandmother would not say no, and my grandfather supported it. So that was where a lot of that exposure came because initially my dad thought that I was seeing my grandmother, but then during the visits, I was exposed to a lot of things that I would then come home and not really talk about. Um, all right. So, I was excited to see her. I was like, I knew it was weird. I knew it was wrong. I knew people were lying. I knew people were covering up. I knew I wasn't supposed to see her. I knew all of these things, but I still went exposed. So, while in Lindsay or Exeter, so Lindsay, my great grandmother Barry was still alive. My birth mother, a lot of times, was staying with her. She didn't die until shortly early on in my childhood, but she was still around, also another enabler. So while in Lindsay or Exeter, so my birth mom lived in Lindsay or Exeter, they're kind of like Clovis and Fresno. Debbie would sometimes take me to different places. It was usually to buy drugs or to a party at someone's house. There were always lots of bikers and such people around. I know no discrimination against bikers. I know some really great bikers, and I love the biker community, but there's also a bad side of bikers, just like there's good and bad to all communities. Okay, so no discrimination there. But I was around some of the bad. Okay, some of the bad bikers, but some of them were cool. They took care of me in ways. She seemed to like that kind of environment a lot. I, on the other hand, always felt a little uncomfortable because the men would look at me with lust and depravity in their eyes. There were hardly any other kids to play with, and all the adults would get drunk and high. There were a lot of times when I would watch Debbie snort cocaine and smoke joints. So, yeah, I would just be this kid wandering around with a bunch of adults partying, hardly any other kids around. Um, it was quite strange, but I just did whatever. I would witness her prostitute herself, and even though it wasn't on the streets, men would come over and offer her money for sex in return. I knew what that meant even at such a young age. I was wise beyond my years. She would often get drunk until she passed out. So there was a lot of times where it was just her and I. People would come over, they would pay her, they would do things, and then she would get high. And I was like starting to catch on to the pattern, and I was starting to pick up on things. And I don't know. I don't know how. I just I just did. I just knew what was going on. It was pretty obvious. Um, but I just looked the other way. The worst times was when a man would beat her up while I hid in the bedroom. I would be able to hear screams and loud sounds of fists hitting her body. I would come out to see lamps knocked over, broken glass on the floor, and spilled beer. Debbie would be crying, smoking her cigarette in the corner or on the couch. Then I would go back to my grandparents' home. So a lot of times I would witness and hear her being beat up, and I would just be in the bedroom. Horrible. So horrible. So scary. And then just to come out again, she's just all messed up, and I always had to put her together, back together. Sometimes Debbie wouldn't know when I was visiting my grandmother in Exeter, which was okay with me, but I still asked if she was around to see me. The answer was usually no. So there was a lot of times where I didn't mind not seeing her. I started to begin to not want to see her. Like it was really bad. I didn't want to be around her. So when my grandmother and I would still visit, I was like, that's fine. Don't tell her. I don't want her to know. Let's just visit you and I, and let's just have fun. And this is my grandma and I. She was hardly ever around anyways, but I still started to now not want to see her. And this was probably around 10, 11, 12. I was just like, I don't know. It was starting to change. It wasn't necessary to see her. However, Debbie's younger sister and brother were around, so I got closer to them. So my birth mom had a younger sister, like a couple years younger than a brother, like 5 years younger. So kind of like our family, but in reverse. It's weird, like how I'm the youngest, then there's a middle, and Jason's 5 years older than me. Um, um, it's kind of the reverse there. My mom, my birth mom was the oldest, and then there was a middle child like my dad, and then there was the youngest, uh, me. So, okay. So my Aunt B, which is my birth mom's younger sister, I'm just going to call her B because we are keeping names private um, for all intensive purposes, of course, we know. So my Aunt B was a very sexy, beautiful, and just a joyous person to be around. She really was. She was beautiful, beautiful. Her smile captivated the room wherever she went. She had long brown hair and beautiful long eyelashes. I loved her taste in music and clothes. I would often go visit her at her apartment during my years while visiting my grandma. I loved spending the night with her. So oftentimes I would go for a Friday to a Sunday. So that allowed 2 nights. So sometimes my aunt would take me from my grandma's house and I'd go to her house, which sometimes it was walking distance from my grandma's house. We'd walk across the railroad tracks and then there would be my aunt's house. And this was all kind of like in Exeter because Exeter is really small. Um, and uh, and Visalia too. Well, it was then. Um, so I would go visit with her, and it was so much fun. She was so much fun. She would cook amazing, delicious meals that I'd never tasted before. She did. She introduced me to like spicy stuff. She would cook the most amazing chicken tacos or just anything Mexican. She just knew how to make Mexican food. Rice, like, oh my gosh, chicken on the barbecue. She knew how to cook, and I had never tasted anything like that. She was like really got into all the like ethnic type foods that I'd never experienced before. My family was mostly white. um, Sandwiches, tri-tip hamburgers, hot dogs, mashed potatoes, ham, turkey. Um, Nothing like Spanish rice or Spanish chicken or any kind of like chipotle chicken or spicy chicken or you know any of that Cajun. None of that. I had never experienced it before until my Aunt B. She would also put on music and dance around the place. So her music, again, like my dad loved music. I grew up around music. She introduced me to a whole lot of other music going on in the 80s. Um, she liked to drink and party too. And sometimes Mid would come over as well. Yeah, she did. She liked to drink. She liked to party. She liked to have her men come over. She liked to dance in front of them too. It was kind of weird, but I mean, they were cool. Not anything unsafe. I never felt unsafe. Um, but not always. Not always did they come over. Most of the time, it was just us, her and I, and it would just be us. She would do strip teases for me around the house and expose her breasts to me, and sometimes even her vagina. Yes, she did. Yep, she did expose her body to me. Yep, yep. Probably why maybe the tendencies for lesbian is there, but um, never really acted on it in a romantic way. I don't know. That's another subject to talk about. Anyways, but yeah, it was kind of strange that she would show herself like that to me, and I would look away, and I'm like, okay. But she was very comfortable with her body. She had a beautiful body, and I don't know, but yeah, it was a little inappropriate to do in front of me. She liked it when I looked at her and admired her naked body. I, of course, felt awkward, but would look away and thought nothing about it. She also exposed me to marijuana. Later, around freshman year, she also taught me how to drink. So, yeah, she was a big pothead. There wasn't, I mean, my dad, I knew about marijuana when I was a baby, or, my dad sold it, he smoked it. So I knew about marijuana, never was a big deal. Um, so, um, she exposed me to it like kind of more of in a party way, like, having me kind of maybe take a hit. And this was around when I'm like 13, 12, 13. Um, and she was drinking. I think I had my first drink at like 12, 13. Later around freshman year, like I said, freshman year, she also taught me how to drink. So she was kind of sneaking. So we would go on these long car rides, my grandma and me, my grandfather and her. We go on these long car rides all through the back of Exeter and into the hills through Farmersville and all that. My grandfather would drive, and he'd always have a cooler of beer. So I'd be in the back seat with my aunt. My grandma would be in the front. My grandpa driving. He's drinking. My aunt's drinking. And sometimes she would pass me a bottle, and I'd be back there drinking, sipping off of one beer. Probably, I think I only had like one beer, but still, like, I'm a child. Hello. Oh my gosh. All right. My uncle K on Debbie's side of my parents was my partner in crime when I was growing up. So my birth mom Debbie had a younger brother, the youngest of the family, like me. And so we would hang out. So his name started with K, and keeping names private, but My Uncle K is what we're calling him, and he was a very, very fun uncle to be around because he was young and he was just a few years older than me, and I don't know, he was he was so much fun. When I would visit him, I would stay in his room with him. We would share a bed, and I would always sleep by the wall. My uncle had always wanted to protect me. He and I would go dirt bike racing and go kart racing down the streets. He would pick on me all the time and play nookie on my head with his knuckles. So yeah, so this is in Exeter in the very shack of a house that my grandmother had with my grandfather. We walked in, there was a bedroom. Well, actually, walked in and there was just a living room, small. Then a tiny bedroom, and then a bathroom that shared, and then his bedroom, and then it opened up into the kitchen that you could walk through from the living room on both sides. But anyways, there was a kitchen. So there was no other place for me to stay. So I would sleep in his room and share his bed and everything, watch TV, everything. So he was like my best bud growing up, and he was all into go kart racing, the old time go kart racing with the metal frame and just you basically a seat on the road between a few wheels and you know. But he was into dirt bikes, and so we would play on those, and we get into so much mischief. He was so much fun, and that nookie. What I'm meaning is he would nookie like on my he would get me in like a headlock and he'd nookie on my head, and I think that's from like Goonies. I'm not really sure, Nookie, or where it originated from, but I didn't like it. But always pick on me. Always pick on me. We would often, let's see, we would often share the same sofa seat while watching TV. He made the times visiting my grandma all that much better. I'm sure my presence was a point of relief for him too, as he too had had a chaotic childhood. And all these years, I never spoke about the madness I had experienced. And so I'd return home to the same truck stop, meet my father, who would be with my sister sometimes, and return to Fresno, where I would pretend that none of what I just experienced had happened. But it did, and no one knew. So yeah, my uncle didn't have the best growing up. Most of the time, my grandfather was a violent alcoholic. So he was alone in the house with just his mom and dad. And so it was hard. So when I would visit, it would be joyous for him, and it allowed him to escape and have fun and do things and get out of the house and away from our evil, well, my evil grandfather, his evil father. We would have a lot of fun. So that's what I mean by all of that, by my uncle not having it the best, because he was stuck in that house for a long time until he could leave himself. Um, and then again, I would come back to Fresno. I would meet my dad at the same truck stop, sometimes with my stepmom, sometimes with my stepsister, sometimes just my dad. But I was always affected in some way. It wasn't always glorious. And I would just say, yeah, the weekends was fine, Dad. I had a good time. I had a good time. Can't remember all that I would say, but I definitely didn't share um, too much detail as to what really happened. So now we're going to get further into my grandfather, Leroy. This is pretty dark. My grandfather was a pretty bad, evil person. So not sure how far we will be able to finish. We're already at 11:41. This is a pretty rough subchapter about my grandfather. So I subchaptered it, entitled it "The Devil in Him." Leroy was his name, and he was Debbie's father, who was unfortunately made made to be my grandfather. I was shown a picture by my grandfather once when I was a young child of Leroy's father. He had looked like Satan. Satan. If Satan had ever walked on this earth, it was at that time and helped make Leroy. So that's a symbolism of how evil my grandfather was. I'm not kidding. My grandmother and I, she always liked to go through old photos with me. And there was a photo of my grandfather, or great grandfather, his father. And she showed it to me. And it shook me. Like, I I just was dumbfounded that it was so evil and dark. The eyes of this man in this photo was so evil and so dark that it 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 resonated and made a mark in my memory as to why my grandfather was so evil himself. And I'll never forget that photo. And um, my grandmother told me a lot of stories about my grandfather's father, and that he wasn't the best of people, and that he was a very violent man. And he would hurt my grandfather, not just physically, mentally, but mentally, emotionally, psychologically. So, there's generational curses that happen, and I'm not trying to make excuses or anything, but it helps explain why perhaps my grandfather was so evil, because look at the bloodline, look at what he was raised by. So that's why I say the devil, because I was raised Catholic in these years. All I knew was God and the devil and hell and heaven. And this was the first time I'd ever seen that kind of evil. So it was quite striking in my life, um, when I saw that photo. So, um, so I say, kind of, if Satan were ever alive, or around when my grandfather was born, then he helped make Leroy. To me, a grandfather is supposed to be like a second father figure, but better because they tell stories of ancient times. They give big bear hugs, spoil you rotten with ice cream, and give knee rides on their lap. They are there to tuck you in at night and read you bedtime stories. They are there to help you learn how to ride a bike and pick you up from school. They are there to play hide and go seek with. They are supposed to be the strongest examples of men for you to look up to, for love, guidance, and wisdom. Unfortunately, Leroy was the exact opposite of all of those things to me during my childhood. He became Satan to me. Leroy wasn't a stupid man by any means. He had been raised with privilege, money, and education. His father had been, however, very abusive to him. That is what he chose to carry on to others, including my grandmother, Debbie, my birth mom, her siblings, and ultimately me. Leroy had many interests, including old cars. He liked guns, booze, women, and scaring vulnerable people. My father had told me once that there were not as many people that he was afraid of, but Leroy scared the hell out of him. When I was a child, he would often play jokes on me. My uncle and grandma, he would play jokes on all of us. It would be just the four of us at the house in Exeter when I would visit my grandmother. So, like I said, it was my Uncle Kay, um, living in the house, and it was my grandparents, and then I would come to visit. So, the fun we would, the fun we had would last only a while until it turned ugly quickly. and we wouldn't be laughing anymore. So this would be about maybe 5, 6, 7, 8-ish. I don't know. Things would start to change in the evening very quickly. By then, Leroy, my grandfather, would be drunk, and we would be scared. He would start drinking at the crack of dawn, and he would not stop until he went to bed. So, when the fun was over, it really was over. This usually meant a loaded shotgun, which would be displayed on the arm of his chair, and everyone would go silent. So that's what he would turn into, is he would sit there in his chair and he would get the gun, shock it with, make sure it was loaded, and then he'd hold it on the arm of the chair. Just have it facing like the TV, the radio, the wall, but he'd be sitting on the side, and my grandma or my uncle would be sitting on his side, and we'd be all like, time to go to bed, or, you know. But not all of it was bad. So here I am explaining some of the good times. I don't know how there could be good times when you have those kind of moments, but they did exist. Not all of it was bad. Some of the weekend visits to go see my grandmother were joyous. My grandmother was a true child at heart and still is. She is so spunky. She was so fun, so vibrant. My grandmother was a true child at heart and still is. Her smile was always as wide as the ocean and her heart pure as gold. We were the best buddies growing up. She really was like my best friend growing up, my grandma. She was just so much fun. I didn't have any friends in Exeter, so my grandmother was it. We would play games, puzzles, and make believe in the backyard. She would spoil me by buying me every game and toy that I could imagine. And even though they were very poor, she would make sure I had the nicest of things. So she would buy me a new gift every time I came. It was a lot of times a Barbie. She would get me sometimes the most gorgeous Barbie for like Christmas or my birthday, like I don't know, like the collectors Barbies and all that stuff. She would get me games and then she would play with me with all of these games. I mean, it was amazing. She was amazing. There would usually be something new to color or play with when I would arrive at her house. I used to love paint by number, electro bright, etch a sketch, watercolors, and movies. So paint by number, they still have that where there's number colored color paint, and orange is number 4 and you paint all the number 4s orange, and then blue is number 2 and you paint all the 2s blue, and then it turns into this really beautiful art piece, and it's really fun. I like it. I do it a lot. I have a couple of designs that I've done that bring me a lot of joy because I created them. They're fun. I wonder, where's my cat went? I moved it somewhere. Anyways, let's see. There was also Electro Bright. So Electro Bright was an old game back in the 80s. It was this electronic board that had a light on the back of it, and you put in these colored little pins, and it would make like an owl, or it would be like a mosaic, or it'd make like a happy face, or it'd make like a house, or it'd make like a dog, but it would be like, again, different colored lights, the blue going to the blue and the yellow. And then eventually when you're done with the whole Electrobright, it would be this beautiful like collage. Probably why I love art so much. And then Etch a Sketch is still around. Etch a Sketch is where it's what is it, lead? It's lead and like this, how do you even describe Etch a Sketch? Um, it's like the sand type, lead type. element that's in this filter, and you got these two dials, and through the two dials, one moves left and right, up and down, the other one moves up and down, left and right, and then together you can make, again, you can make like a house, you can make trees, but it's all kind of linked together. So you have to know how to like move everything to where it's not just a scrambled mess. Um, Etch a sketch is really cool. Watercolors, of course, were always fun. I would have watercoloring, coloring books like Disney coloring books. Watercolor coloring books were literally it's just water and watercolors, and just that was always fun. And then old classic movies. I grew up with Pollyanna. Um, I grew up with like all the Disney movies, Snow White, Cinderella. Pollyanna was my favorite. Just yeah, all those classics I grew up with. My grandma had them like she tried her best. They were very poor, but she spoiled me. I was her only grandchild. Like she spoiled me, and like I loved it. She was so cool. My favorites were always the Disney movie Pollyanna, which I learned the glad game. In the movie Pollyanna, she learned that if she took a prism to the light, it would shine a rainbow reflection onto the wall, creating a rainbow, which made her smile. So she would visit this sad elderly lady and bring prisms along her way. She began to show that the lady she began to show that lady how a prism could provoke a smile with its stunning rainbows and would remind her not to be sad. Pollyanna would say, "Always find something to be glad about, even when everything around you is blue. Always find something to be glad about, even when everything around you is blue." I loved spending time with my grandma in Exeter. So yeah, Pollyanna was a really great movie. What happened was there was this lady that was in an accident and she was bedridden, and so people would like make fun of this lady, thinking like she was all weak or whatever. And so Pollyanna actually made friends with her, started to go over to her house, saw how depressed this lady was, and brought her prisms, these like crystal prisms, and would show this lady the beautiful rainbow effect, and so it would bring this lady happiness and joy. And so having Pollyanna around really brought some good cheer. And so together they formed kind of like a game, like a glad game, and something to always remind you to be happy about, like no matter in your darkest of times, there's some kind of glimmer of hope. There's something that can always tell you or show you some beauty and something to smile about. Um, so I never forgot that about the message in Pollyanna. And then Pollyanna even goes through her own struggle where she has an accident and she starts to lose her joy. But then she's reminded by the town and the people, because they love her and everything that she's brought to their lives, all this joy and happiness, that they're like, Pollyanna, you can't give up. And so then she finds her strength and she, you know, lives happily ever after. Okay. So she would always shower me with so much love and happiness. My grandma really did. When Leroy would say mean things to me, my grandmother would tell me the opposite and told me never to believe him. So I'll explain a little further about that. He was quite verbally abusive. When I would wake up in the morning, my normal routine consisted of going to the couch and sitting by Leroy. Sorry, I'm doing that because I live by the airport here and we have an air base. And Okay, very sorry about that. Pause. I live by an air base here in Fresno, California. We have an air base, and four fighter jets just flew off and across, and they fly right over my apartment, and they're very loud. So they're probably doing all of you know who's bad deeds that shouldn't be wasting our taxpayer money on their time. But aren't we proud to be Americans? Darn it. Anyways, okay, back to silence and to the story. All right. Okay, so Leroy would say mean things to me, right? When I'd wake up in the mornings, the normal routine, my normal routine consisted of going to the couch and sitting by Leroy. He would usually be sitting in that recliner of his, smoking a cigarette, having a beer, and listening to the police scanner. This would be my normal routine with my grandfather. He's sitting in the recliner, he's got his beer, he's got his cigarette, and he's got the damn police scanner on because he's listening to what's going on in Exeter and what all the police are doing and who's being arrested and what's going on with who. And it was very small town. It still is, but like, yeah, that was my routine. Um, my grandmother would give me my favorite cereal, Fruity Pebbles. I love Fruity Pebbles, and serve it to me on a TV tray. I had these laptop like lap trays that were like short legs and just put over your lap, and like they were like maybe Cinderella, or there was like Snow White, or there was like Care Bears, and it was like a design. It might have been my uncle's too. My uncle K, he had like Transformer ones, and he had like GI Joe. And so she prepared this tray, and sit it on my lap as I'm sitting on the couch. My grandfather's over there, smoking his thing, and then here I am, you know Okay. So she'd serve it on a TV tray. She would also make me the best and sweetest coffee in the world. Yes, I drank coffee as a child. Yeah, so she would give me coffee. She gave me coffee as a kid. Maybe it helped. I don't know. I probably should have been diagnosed with ADHD. But she would make it so sweet, and it had like probably barely any coffee, but it had milk and sugar, and it was so good. Um, So she loved coffee and still does. She'll drink coffee from morning to night. Right before bed, and she'll sleep soundly. It's insane. Coffee is known to have proven benefits. So why not? I mean, as I would sit there, the stench and smoke of Leroy's cigarette. Oh, we're right at 12. Okay, let's just stop there. I think we should just stop there. Because it's going to go into more of Leroy. Yeah, it's gonna get into some pretty hairy stuff. Yeah, I think we're gonna stop there. I think it would be good and wise to hold our space as safe as we can and not overwhelm myself or each other, because it does get a little hairy. Um, okay, so we're gonna stop here. Today's 6th. So the next time we'll get together, I do have my birthday coming up next Tuesday, the 9th. Woo, woo, woo. I'm going to be 48 years old. Never thought that I would live this long. So it's quite amazing, and I'm very happy to be alive. Um, and having this podcast, this is so great. Many people are watching it after it's saved, and then they're watching it, and it's going to be always available. So that's really cool. And thank you, Rhonda, for being my supporter out there. Um, love you. But yeah, the next podcast is going to be the 13th. So next Saturday, we're going to again obviously go into chapter 2. I think we're probably going to have a couple of sessions with chapter 2. I mean, we're almost done. We might we might finish. I don't know. I never can guarantee. But if so, we might not. Yeah, we're probably not going to finish chapter 2. I don't know. But stay tuned. I appreciate your support. You can always find me on Facebook, Live Vertically. You can always find me on Amazon. My book is available, Dragonflies and Demons, Barnes and Noble, or you can just Google me, Dragonflies and Demons by Cheyenne Jenvey, and you can find all kinds of platforms on how to find my book. Um, but look around on my page. There's other positive things that I do. I make videos of positivity, of good, mantras, things to think about. I also have some music out there. I have some positive mantras that I think that anybody can appreciate. So let me know what you think about my channel. Share it, please. And enjoy your day. And I hope you have a wonderful Saturday. And thank you. Bye, everybody.